Section number two is going to continue talking about our ecosystems, but specifically today what we're going to be looking at is we're going to talk about some of the relationships that occur amongst living things. Okay, so we're focusing mostly on some names and some vocabulary of these things that are interacting with one another. So when studying an ecosystem, ecologists often break it down into those smaller pieces, those smaller bits, to see some of those interactions that are going to be taking place. If you turn in your book to page 627, you're going to see down there at the bottom a picture of the ocean. Okay, nice pretty blue picture. But what you're going to do is you're going to see a school of bannerfish that live in the coral reef. So we're not just talking about the ocean. What we're doing is we're taking a specific portion of the ocean, specifically being that coral reef. Now, in the coral reef or along the coral reef, you're going to find lots of different things in there. You're going to see seahorses, you're going to see other schools of fish, you're going to see the sharks, and you're going to see some of the sponges and algae and things like that that are going to be also living kind of along the rocks of that coral reef. So lots of different things that are going to be living there. A population is just going to be a group of the same type of organisms that live in the same place. So when we said that or saw that school of bannerfish, that's going to be a population. So looking at how many of them or of a specific type of fish there's going to be. When we talk about the seahorses, okay, again, specifically focusing on just those seahorses. So a population is a group, same type of living organism that lives in that same place at the same time. Now, can you think of some different populations around Nebraska? Okay, well, if we want to talk pasture land, yes, we've got area where you're going to have cows. But of course, we also have areas if we want to talk about just the raccoons, just the skunks, just the deer, and things like that. If you want to talk about a pig farm, I know they're not running wild, but again, we could look at a population there. Okay, so some different populations around Nebraska. Many populations live in an ecosystem like that coral reef. Okay, so when we talked about the sharks, seahorses, bannerfish, and things like that, there's going to be lots of different things living in that ocean. Now, if we go to the Sahara Desert, again, there's going to be different types of animals that are going to be roaming that desert. So again, different areas are going to have different populations. All of these populations that live together are going to be known as a community. The members of a community, they are going to depend on each other for food, shelter, and other needs. Yes, when I talk about food, some of them are going to eat one another. But maybe you've seen pictures of that elephant and say there's that bird that's riding on its back. Basically, that bird is going to be helping that elephant out by eating some of the bugs and insects that are going to be crawling around on it. When we talk about the trees, some of those trees are going to provide shelter for some of those different populations. So again, like I said, there's going to be other needs that are going to be in there also. So for example, a shark depends on the fish population for its food. The fish populations depends on the coral animals to build that reef where we were talking earlier, and what it's going to do is it's going to provide shelter and hopefully hide some of those fish from the sharks. So again, you can kind of see how some of these different things are going to depend on one another. Yes, I understand it is the hunting and there is that killing that's going on, but some of those sharks eat the fish. But to save the fish, they're going to try and hide from those sharks and so forth. Think about what the word population means. How many of something there is. 5, 10, 20. Maybe we're talking hundreds of animals. But let's go ahead and let's talk about a population density and what specifically that means. Density, it's a science word. Sometimes you've seen it used in math too. But let's go ahead and look at this. Let's say I have a room in the school, and in that room it's made up of 15 desks and I have 11 students. Okay, so you can see that I have enough desks for all of my students. But now let's go to another year. Now I have 22 students, still only have those 15 desks. So I'm not able to right now, or my needs in my room don't satisfy those students by having only 15 desks. So what we're saying is, I don't have enough resources to satisfy the needs of those students in my room when we only have 15 desks and there end up being 22 students. Same thing can be talked about when we talk about population density in nature. You know, again, if we're talking, and I used it in the last video, if we're talking about the grasslands or pasture area for cows, you know, again, we can put a certain number of cows in that pasture area, so the grassland is going to satisfy the needs of those cows. But if I overpopulate it, I'm going to have too large of a population density for that pasture land. So basically what we're saying is, when we say population density, how many of an object or how many of a certain population are in that area of pasture land. Same thing, we could be talking about butterflies and trees and things like that. How many butterflies are going to be on this tree, or how many butterflies occupy this area? How many birds are able to occupy this rainforest and things like that. Population density, it's just the size of a population compared to its area. Okay, specifically what type of area we're going to be looking at. Ecologists, they study this population density of different species to make sure that there is that balance for these species to survive. If there isn't enough of a certain organism to survive, you have a limiting factor. So, as I said earlier, if we have an overpopulation of deer and they're out walking around looking for the berries and then kind of that grassland and things like that, if we have too many deer, again, it's going to be an overpopulation. And again, anytime there's an overpopulation, some things don't grow healthy. They don't get big enough, and sometimes that's when some of those diseases set in, when you have that limiting factor. Okay, so there needs to be that good balance so we don't have limiting factors affecting that population density. For example, you know, again, I get back to the deer, and that's kind of what I talked about. Let's say that not very many deer were taken during a fall hunting season. That would mean there are more deer to reproduce. Anytime there are more deer to reproduce, that means we have more deer the next year. So to prevent that overpopulation, that's when we sometimes allow extra tags for hunting. That's when we maybe allow you to take 2 deer per 1 tag and things like that. So with more deer, that might mean that there's not enough food to eat, and diseases are going to set in for those deer.